Tactical Tangents.
Hey guys, this is Mike from Tactical Tangents, and this short bonus episode is brought to you by Drip Drop. Drip Drop Oral Rehydration Solution is an electrolyte powder that you mix with water. It was formulated by a doctor for quick absorption. I work in the desert, and it only takes a few hours working in the heat, wearing body armor and carrying around a bunch of gear before I start feeling like crap and fall behind the curve in dehydration. Drip Drop keeps you in the fight so you can finish the mission and rehab for the next one. Go find some at Amazon.com, on DripDrop.com, or ask your supply guy to get it for you. I want to talk a little bit about bullet accountability real quick. There's a news story that came out recently. I'll put a link up from Los Angeles where an officer-involved shooting occurred in a clothing store. And in the course of this shooting, a 14-year-old girl in a dressing room was shot and killed by a stray round that is believed to have been fired by law enforcement. Now, this is an early report, and obviously there are details that we don't know or have not been released yet, but it brings up a theme that we have talked about and something that I want to reiterate a little bit today. One of the hardest things to learn as a police officer is not how to go fast or how to slow things down. It's knowing when to speed up and when to slow down. And this is true in self-defense as well. There are times where you should be aggressive and decisive, and there are times that you need to try to de-escalate and back away and get distance. And it's not really teaching one or the other that is difficult so much as understanding when to do which. And that constant throttling is something that we have emphasized a lot on the podcast. You don't need to be the fastest or the strongest or the most precise in a lot of situations. What you need to do is have the agility to shift tactics or speed up and slow down. It's that flexibility that is the key. One of the most important things to learn as it relates to this balance of going fast or slow is exactly what your capabilities and limitations are. If you know how far or how fast you can shoot and where your point of failure is, you can make a lot of decisions within those left and right limits that will drive your decision making. So let's say you are not the world's greatest shooter. You're a police officer. You generally meet the standard, which frankly, for police officers, the shooting standard is usually pretty low, but you're consistent. You always pass the quals on the first try. You know what shots are challenging for you. That might mean when you're confronted with a certain threat, you've got to get closer and close distance before you can pull the trigger. And that is a time where you move really, really fast. You're going to run up and close distance with this person so that you can get good shots. Now, notice in this case, it doesn't mean necessarily shooting fast. It might also mean shooting fast once you get close enough, but mostly what we're talking about is moving fast, getting up to them, right? So there's a difference. And if you are a good or above average shooter and you know with confidence which shots you can make and which ones you have to really concentrate on, that helps a lot. But this requires that you be very realistic with yourself and ultimately that you shoot a lot. Just because this was a shot that you could have made back in the day when you did the academy, or you went to firearms instructor school and you got to shoot a lot, and so you were really good back then, however many years ago, that is not the same thing as I could make this shot today, right now. So you have to be realistic with yourself and know where those points of failure are. A really big component to this is also stress management. You have to not be so assed up that you don't see the forest for the trees. So what I mean by that is that whole fourth rule of firearm safety, where knowing your target and its surroundings, what sorts of things could step in front of your shot, what is behind and around your target. If I'm standing 5 yards from a dude who's trying to kill me and he's got a brick wall behind him, I don't have to be quite as surgical with my shots as I do if I'm talking about a guy with a hostage in a crowd. But I definitely have to recognize the difference and change my actions accordingly. That's the key. And the way that you get there has a lot to do with how you manage stress inoculation and all that. The only way you get really good at that is by stepping out of your comfort zone and training firearms proficiency to a degree that you are good even without having to put a lot of thought into it. If you have to really, really concentrate on those 25-yard shots or whatever, and you know that on any given day, you might only get 3 out of 5 hits, 4 out of 5 hits, that's an important metric. And if you're able to do those same shots in a way that like, hey, I got to slow down a little bit and focus a little bit more, but I'm pretty relaxed and I can usually get all my hits, that's good to know. but you have to kind of have an idea or a metric to measure yourself against so that you know what you're capable of. Let's say you do shooting qualifications. A lot of cops every quarter, a couple times a year, once a year, whatever, have to go do a shooting qualification. If you are the type of person who gets a little nervous or anxious, or if you go and shoot on qualification day and you perform bad because it's the qual, versus you just go shoot on the range with your buddies, that's a red flag, right? The qualification is a known standard. There's no reason you should ever be in a fair fight with a known enemy or a known standard, especially if that standard, like I said earlier, isn't really all that high, right? So two big components to this, well, three really, as it relates to practical advice for round accountability. The first is training to a degree of automaticity. You need to work your proficiency skills to the point that you can apply them without a lot of conscious and deliberate effort, because you need to save those brain bites to process the problem, the specific scenario that you are confronted with. The second is the stress management, stress inoculation side of it. And both of these are areas that you can work on with deliberate practice. There's 4 basic elements to the idea of deliberate practice. There's a book that talks a lot about this called Talent is Overrated by Jeff Colvin. Those 4 basic elements. One is you need a high level of repetition, and not just on the front end at the academy. I mean ongoing recent practice, something that you do often and you keep fresh, both in shooting and in decision-making skills through things like scenarios, and even by learning through real-life experiences, right? You go to calls or traffic stops or things get weird, whatever. You debrief those critically after the fact, which brings me to the next thing, which is you need coaching and feedback. Some of this you can get on your own, right? Like nowadays we have body-worn camera, and a lot of times I'll be on a call and I'll go back and I'll watch that video. Hey, how did I do on this? Like, could I have been more clear in my communications? Could I have done this or that differently? Like, did I see what I thought I saw? But you also need to seek out people with expertise and insight that can kind of help you grow. So feedback and coaching is a big part of it. Another big one is or kind of the third element is getting out of your comfort zone. You have to challenge yourself and operate on the edges of your limits, because that's where the growth occurs. If you only stay in your little bubble, you're never going to learn how to function when the going gets tough. When I had rookie police officers that I was training as a field training officer, one of the things that I would do is really kind of put them in the spotlight. And hey, you're running this call, go. And I would encourage them when they left me that when they got on their own to not just rely on the senior officer to go run their situations for them and just kind of be a wallflower about it. Put yourself out there, make mistakes, let yourself be wrong from time to time, because that's how you grow. And so you've got to be willing to step out of that comfort zone a little bit. And yeah, that might mean making some mistakes and falling on your face and maybe even embarrassing yourself from time to time. But what comes out of that is growth that you'll never get otherwise. And you'll be glad that you did someday when things really get tough. And then the final last thing, part of deliberate practice, is you've got to be mentally engaged. You have to actually be thoughtful about what you're doing while you do it. There was a critical incident I went to a little while back, and I was asking one of the officers that went to this thing about his decision making. There was some decisions that got made that were actually mostly good. And I was asking, like, hey, so what was going through your mind? How did you process that and arrive at this decision? And he told me, I don't know, man, I just did it. I just went for it. And I struggle with this a little bit because, yes, there are some decisions that you will do sort of subconsciously. And that's a good thing. Most of the time, training and habits will imprint decision-making and actions that can happen without a lot of deliberate thought. And that is good. We should capitalize on that, right? But at the same time, you've got to be careful, because if you act too impulsively on certain things, you'll fail to see other alternatives or other possibilities. So you got to make sure that you are mentally engaged and that you have a problem-solving mindset as much as you reasonably can when you go into one of these critical or high-stress, serious encounters. So those are kind of the 4 elements of deliberate practice: high level of repetition, coaching and feedback, getting out of your comfort zone, and being mentally engaged in the problem or the task. The last point that I want to make as it relates to round accountability and all of that, and this is something, we did a recent episode about the UPS truck shooting that happened in Miami in 2019. It's episode, I don't know, 104, I think, something like that. One of the early 100 episodes. And that is discipline. And this applies in a lot of ways, right? You have to have the discipline to do the work on the front end, to go out and train and practice and prepare, and the discipline to hold yourself accountable, not only in training, but in real life. And you've also got to have the discipline to make critical decisions in a way that doesn't put other people at risk. You know, getting in gunfights is a dangerous and scary thing. It's easy to sit here on a podcast and say that you shouldn't shoot back at a guy who is shooting at you. Like that's a tall order. And I understand that it's easier said than done. But it doesn't change the fact that you must be able to process those situations and make decisions according to the challenges that you're faced with. You cannot just open fire in the general direction of danger. That is not how this works. You have to have the discipline to be better than that. You have to. There's no way around that. That might mean accepting more risk. That might mean you're exposed to more danger. But in law enforcement, especially, that is a risk that we have accepted. And as much as that sucks, maybe it just means that you have to move to cover or close the distance to get a better shot. But at the end of the day, you still can't lose sight of your responsibilities as a shooter. You have potentially the rest of your life to get better at that task, to be a better shooter, to learn from your mistakes and your experiences, and to get ready for that day. Don't arrive at the day that you get tested wondering to yourself if you could have done more to prepare and be ready for that. But instead, you decided to sit on the couch or play video games or something else. Get better every day, be accountable for your actions, because your day might come and you got to get ready. So that's all I got. Make sure you go get you some drip drop. Good talk.